So, what is this fascination with zombies? I mean, 50 years ago, maybe you saw it or seen it, the Night of the Living Dead came out. It popularized our obsession, our fascination with zombies. Maybe you somehow missed this phenomena. Those badly decomposing corpses that are somehow still alive, walking around, terrorizing the rest of us. Some find those Halloween horrors entertaining, or if you're like me, you can simply be baffled as to what it's all about. How in the world is that popular? When in all the movies, this half-dead, half-alive creatures stalk us like Frankensteins with really bad makeup. And yet we wonder, what does happen when we die? Do we become zombies? What happens to our bodies? And if there's a life after death, how does that come about? Is there a bright light at the end of a dark tunnel? In a way, these questions are not just for Halloween thrill seekers. Instead, we all wonder what will happen next. Christians wrestle with predictions, and movies tantalize us with forecasts about as accurate as a groundhog in February at prognosticating what the weather's going to be. Popular books at one time, like Left Behind, give us a thrill, or maybe it's a fear of wondering which one of us will be taken to heaven and which one of us won't quite make it, not quite faithful enough, and will be left behind, having to cope in a chaotic world with pilotless airplanes crashing into things. What's going to happen when we die? And what's happened to those we've loved who've died? Where are they? Is Jesus going to return for us? And when and what will that return be like? We want answers and timetables. We'd like a schedule so we can plan accordingly. And the scriptures, often we receive conflicting accounts and cryptic descriptions and more mystery and questions than we desire. This morning we have a letter from the Apostle Paul. It was written to Christians in Thessalonica around 51 AD. That's only a couple decades after Jesus had been crucified and after the resurrection. This is some of the earliest correspondence of anything we have in the Bible. In fact, if you were arranging the New Testament in chronological order, 1 Thessalonians would be at the very beginning. It's earlier than Mark and Matthew and Luke and John, or any other letters written by Paul. So in these very first decades after Jesus' resurrection, believers were confused and they were worried. They had thought Jesus would have been back by now, that Jesus would have returned to take them to heaven. They believed he would come and take them straight to heaven. They wouldn't have to go through any persecutions, any diseases. They wouldn't have to go through aging, declining health, frailty. They could simply be with God. And instead, they had watched their loved ones die, as many of us have. Watching the ones we care for cease to breathe and be buried. What's next for them, we wonder. And what will happen for us if Jesus continues to be delayed? Paul reassures those early believers in this letter, and he offers them good news. It must have been a significant letter because it was saved and reread and shared with communities all around the world at that time, saved enough that it's here in our Bible, and it comes to us as a message from God. Listen now for God's Spirit at work. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do, who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpets will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. We know the sadness of losing loved ones in just the past 12 months. Just in this congregation, 20 of those we have loved have passed away. Some after long, long illnesses, and others very suddenly with very little warning. Some had long, full lives, others had more years than we had hoped that we and they could enjoy together. Some were far too young and never got to grow up. We grieve. We miss them. We wish they were still with us, and we look around for their presence, their laughter, their quirky jokes, their smiles, and all we feel is their absence. We grieve, but Paul reminds us we do not grieve as those without hope. Paul reassures those believers. Paul reassures us that death has not won this battle. In Christ, death is not victorious. Paul will proclaim in another letter, death has lost its sting. Well, maybe it doesn't feel that way to us. Death still hurts. It hurts a lot. It hurts for a long time. We ache inside and grieve and miss them. We dread these coming holidays. We want to grit our teeth just to get through another anniversary of all kinds in this first year, this second year, this third year. But through God's power, we have victory even over this death. Death does not have the final word. Jesus died, and Jesus rose again. In those few words nestled in this letter, Paul shares what must have been one of the earliest creedal statements of all the church. 5 words: Jesus died and rose again, and so will we. God will reunite us with those who've gone before us. Jesus will return and take us to him. Therefore, even though we grieve, and we grieve mightily, we also have hope. How would it all happen? I don't think we have answers or a complete blueprint of how it will occur. And we should be really skeptical of those who claim they can read the Bible like a crystal ball and give us a time frame. Instead, in this letter from Paul, he reassures those believers and us that all will be reunited. Those who've gone before us and those still on earth. Paul in this letter doesn't deal with those who are not believing. That's not the point of this letter. Those early Christians in Thessalonica, those whose grief is still fresh and raw, everyone will be in Christ. And Paul writes to encourage those who are grieving and afraid of never seeing their loved ones again. In that Greek culture in which they lived, there was little hope for meaningful life beyond the grave. This earthly life was all they had, and no wonder they grieved terribly at the thought of never seeing their loved one again. And Paul says, do not grieve without hope, because you have a promise. You have a hope from Jesus. And when he returns, we will be enraptured into the heavens with Christ, snatched away from the earthly powers of death. Hope. That's how we live and even how we grieve as followers of Christ. Paul reminds them they will be with the Lord forever. In the book of Revelation, at the end of the New Testament, we hear yet more visions of this life with Christ as people from every nation and land stand before the presence of God, worshiping day and night. In this presence of God, there's no more hunger, there's no more thirst, there's no more tears, no more weeping, because God will wipe every tear from our eyes. That is our hope and our promise, not just for those who have died, but for those of us who are still living, those of us who are struggling, those of us who are searching. We join with all the saints who gather now in the presence of God, and we look forward to being reunited with them. We are surrounded by that great cloud of witnesses. We stand on the shoulders of those who have nurtured us, who have taught us the faith, who have inspired us to be strong and to trust in this God of love. Some were mature and old and wise, with sage wisdom and courage beyond their years. And others were young and surprised us with their wisdom and with their insight. And they taught us by their examples not only how to live strong, not only how to do good things, but also how to face death with hope. So with Easter hope, with the resurrection promise, let us join in prayer. God of the living and God of the resurrection, come now and reassure us of your promise and of your hope. Help lift our weary hearts. Grant us your strong presence and peace for the living of this and every day. Amen.